I've often asked me, you were really poor when you were young. I say, no, we weren't poor at all. We were incredibly wealthy. We didn't have much money, but we were incredibly wealthy. I think we were more wealthy than today's society because we have family. And the families in those days were incredibly close. They had to be. They come through the war. It was all about, they knew how to support people in the best possible way. So we were incredibly wealthy. It wasn't that kind of, it wasn't poverty at all. We had not much money, but money doesn't buy you happiness. It really doesn't. For instance, we used to have to mend our own shoes. I mean, how many people can do that today? How many people, we used to wear our shoes till we had a hole in them, then you put a piece of cardboard in until it rained, and then the cardboard got wet and you had a wet sock as well, and you think, I'd better mend my shoes. So you went home and there'd always be a metal shoe horse in the house, in most of the houses in working class London. There were places where you could buy the leather for the sole, and get the tacks, and you fill your mouth up with the tacks, and a hammer, and you boom, 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 put a new piece of leather on the sole, you cut round it with a razor knife, and then you wax it, and you mend your own shoes. But who can do that today? Nobody bothers, they just throw everything away. What value is anything? It's kind of weird. I try and hang on to things until they fall off me.
Does he have holes in his shoes? I can't see.
These jeans have done the last 15 years of touring. I have washed them in between.
Roger has said all of that about happiness and money not buying happiness to my kids, and every time we've driven back from his house I've said, right kids, we're going to get rid of all your toys and we're going to mend your shoes, and it still hasn't worked, but we'll keep working on that.
I get them doing it. They'd enjoy it, they'd have fun.
So, pivotal moment, moving on. Pivotal moment, the first time that you remember picking up a microphone and performing on stage. You were 12 years old.
Well, it wasn't a microphone as such.
There was a stage.
There was a stage. I can't remember a microphone. There was no stage because it was a church hall, and it was a youth club. And I had my first homemade guitar, which was very, very rudimentary, a Spanish thing that was more like a cheese cutter than a guitar. But it could make the noise of a guitar, and down low on the fretboard, you could play the three chords that if you learn A, E, and B7, you could play most of the pop songs of the time. And I got up and did a kind of my version of Elvis singing Hound Dog. with my hair greased back with soap. We couldn't afford Brill cream, but the soap worked wonders. And it was just wonderful, I just felt free. And then very shortly after I saw Lonnie Donegan, who was the opposite of Elvis, performing in a dinner jacket and a bow tie, but the way he sang, it just did something to me that Elvis, I loved Elvis, and I thought I'd like to look like Elvis, and everybody thought they'd like to look like Elvis. Some people thought they looked like Elvis. Of course, nobody did except Elvis. But when Lonnie sang, there was something that came out of him that was so primal, it almost lit a touch paper in me, and I thought, that's what I want to do. And I want to find that freedom in myself to just throw my head back and let this thing that I always had perfect pitch. And incidentally, all my grandchildren have perfect pitch at the moment, which is wonderful to hear. And some of them have got quite good voices. So you're not getting rid of me that easy. Yeah, that's what happened, and it was like lighting the fuse of a firework. I just had to do this thing.
And no fear during that. You know, most kids, if they're told to go and do public performance, they get worried about it. And you've always talked about it as being a moment where you were happy. Where was the fear?
Sometimes there's some fear just before you go on, which is kind of natural. But then you grow out of that in a way. And you learn to deal with it. You learn to slow the world down, so your breathing stays in and you don't get the hypers, as I call it. You know, you don't get the wobbles. That comes with experience. But in those days, it was a kind of good fear. But once you're singing, it goes. And if ever I'm a free person, totally free, it's when I'm up on the stage singing. You know, I'm totally, my whole ambition as a singer and my whole work ethic as a singer is to make the audience, you the audience, feel every word, feel the emotion of that word, explore what that word is saying in the emotion and make it touch you. There's so much music today, I think, in the modern world that is played at you. I try to play it to you, for you.
I'm going to borrow we've asked people to ask questions of Roger and send them in, so I'm just going to ask a question. I don't know if they're in the audience, but this is from Max Soderholm. When you play and sing songs with 50 plus years of past performances behind them, do you have any method to keep what you've just described fresh for you and fresh for the audience?
My head, it is a challenge, but I try and imagine in my head, I'm singing that song for the first time. And if in my head I am there, and I am singing that song for the first time, it will always have its own truth. It is not a cheat. So that's the only way I can explain it.
So you come off stage having performed Hound Dog, you're thinking, right, I'm going to be Roger Daltrey, the rock star. How long did the guitar
my first guitar lasted about 6 weeks. And the one thing I could never quite get to grips with, building this thing on my own, which looked like a proper Spanish guitar. I mean, I did quite a good job of it. But I couldn't get the neck, where the neck goes into the body. I didn't know how to do that joint. And after 6 weeks, it just went and it was like a bow and arrow from then on, completely useless. But I was very lucky that the carpenter for the Bedford Park estate, which incidentally was the first garden city ever built in Chiswick in London, and he used to make all the window frames and the fences and the gates and all that stuff. He'd watched me make this first guitar, struggling to do it with interest. And when it folded and I was kind of in tears, guitarless, he knocked on the door and said, oh, come down with me. And I went into his workshop and he helped me make the second one. And the second one was a relatively good guitar compared with the first one. And that lasted for a good couple of years.
So this is the skiffle years, right?
That's the skiffle years.
And how do you go from being just another skiffle band to being a band?
It's a slow process. In those days, every group every street had at least one skiffle group, if not two. Everyone played their own music. There wasn't any other entertainment.
Which is great.
Come forward. So you had to make your own entertainment, and that's what we did. And the great thing about skiffle was everyone could do something, even if it was on Mum's washboard with some thimbles. You get a noise out of it. With a tea chest and a broomstick and a piece of string, you can make that thing sound every bit as good as a stand-up double bass. You really can. A good player can make it sound incredible. So we made our own music, our own entertainment. So on every street corner, you'd see these little skiffle groups all over London. And of course, people come because you see someone you think, he's good, I wonder if I can get him in my band. You try and poach good people from other groups and it changes and slowly changes. And of course, you're getting older and you get through puberty and all that, and testosterone kicks in. And all of a sudden, the Spanish guitar needs to be an electric one. And Hank Marvin had the pink Fender. And the pink Fender was every boy's dream, every musician, or everyone aspiring musician's dream, was to have that pink Fender guitar. But to have been able to afford that pink Fender guitar, you would have had to rob a bank. You could have bought a house for the same amount of money. It was ridiculous. So I decided to make one.
I remember this. And what was the one thing you got wrong about that?
Because
you saw it in the window.
I stood outside the shop window and there was one hanging in the Charing Cross Road. It gets worse. I beg your pardon. There was one hanging in the window of the shop in I think it was the Charing Cross Road, and I stood outside drooling at it and studying it and studying it and studying it and started measuring it through the window. And went home and I bought 2 pieces of 1-inch thick mahogany because I worked out that this thing was probably 2 inches thick, deep. And I bought these two 1-inch pieces of mahogany that big. And I kind of drew out what my measurements kind of told me was this Fender guitar. Cut the neck out roughly the same shape as the Fender guitar, and I shaped the body out to fit. Fender was very clever because the Fender guitar looks like a flat piece of wood, but it's actually tailored for the body. Because it's cut out, it's carved out the back, and the front slopes around, so it's incredibly comfortable to play. What I didn't realise was that the window was magnifying the guitar. And whereas the average Fender guitar weighed about probably, I don't know, 8 pounds, my guitar weighed about 15. But it was very useful if we ever needed it in battle.
Which of course you never did.
No, we never did. The band, with all the fights that we saw from the stage, and we saw many, some of them quite bloody and nasty, the band never ever was attacked. Only once, because of Big Mouth.
That was Pete.
No,
it was
Pete.
you.
No, it was Pete.
Oh, it was Pete.
Pete made the mistake of Big Mouth in a load of Hell's Angels. Not a good idea. Especially when the leader has a ring through his nose, tattoos round his throat like this, and kill across his forehead.
You presumably were the peacemaker.
I ended up being the peacemaker while they all ran away, bleeding. No, not the Hell's Angels, the group. And I ended up sitting on the front of the stage talking to Kill. Hello, Kill.
So the skiffle years become the band years, and you slowly gather a following, and Pete joins, and John joins, and Keith joins, and then we're going to have another short clip from the audiobook. It's another pivotal moment in Roger's story. Can we have the 3rd clip?
So I was 20, still a kid really, and I was at the crossroads. As things had moved on with the band, I had a very real chance to fulfill my dream, or I could abandon it and stay with my young family. The second option was the safe one, and I'll admit, the honourable one, but it just wasn't in my nature to take the safe option. You think you can do anything when you're young, but in some ways, it still isn't in my nature now. I hope I've become a bit wiser with the years, but I still believe in luck and in taking chances. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to give it everything I had, and that meant I had to leave. A few days after I'd walked out, my dad came to see me. I was unloading the equipment for the gig at the Railway Hotel in Wilston, and he came up and told me to get back with Jackie. I told him, Dad, I can't do this marriage bit. This is my life, this thing. And he just went bananas. He was raving at me right in the middle of the street. And then he threw a punch. He wasn't a fighter. It took a lot to get him worked up. Even when I'd been expelled, he didn't hit me. That night outside the railway hotel was the first and only time it happened. I loved my dad. He loved me, and my behaviour was terrible for him to endure.
Yeah.
So that's the point
I
where
was a piece of shit, I mean, but not really. I was too young to get married, but that's what you did in those days. I got Jackie pregnant. And we were I was in one room of a council flat, 6 stories up in Wandsworth, with mother-in-law in the same flat. And I gave it my best, and I just couldn't do it. And I used to look out of the window at the van in the street. I've said this story from the stage many times. And we were called the Detours in those days. And the Detours was kind of written on the side of the van with an arrow pointing out the front, Detours, an arrow. And I swear that van was calling me. And I thought, I've got to follow my dream because I can't do this life. And if my dream works, I can do better for everybody. And I did. It did work. I lived in the van for 6 months all through that summer, that winter, summer, the next summer. And I had some happy times in the van. I liked the van. It was good. And as it happened, the dream became a reality. We became very successful. And I was able to go back after I got divorced from Jackie with a good settlement for her. Even after that good settlement, I went back and we became the best of friends. I could do better for them again. So as it happened, it all worked out. Equally, it could have gone the other way. I don't know. But that was how I was then. I'm not proud of it, but I'm glad I did it because it worked. Would I be glad I did it if it hadn't have worked? I don't think I ever would have let them down, let's put it that way. I'm not that kind of bloke.
you've asked all the follow-up questions I
Have
had
I?
for that bit.
So I interview you?
No, terrible idea. Let's go forward to October 1965. So you make this big decision, and this is on the eve of it being clear that you made the right decision. We've talked about this, the kind of rebellion that started in '63. Can you just tell us a little bit about, I know you've told this story a lot before, but that day in IBC studios recording My Generation, and in particular that lyric?
Well, the song was first presented to us, and from what I remember, it was a bit like the Magic Bus rhythm. Chink, 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 chink. It was a bit like that. But that's a kind of Bo Diddley thing from the 60s that we used to do. And I distinctly remember it was Moon that gave it its drive. He just put everything on the one. And it just... something happened immediately with that song, and it came from Keith. And I do stutter. I have to fight my stutter all the time. That's why reading the book is not an easy thing for me to do, and it wasn't easy to do the audio book. So the stutter at the beginning was done unintentionally at first, and then Kit Lambert went, wow, keep it in. And then, of course, it became part of the song, and it's legendary now. But what it did is that it sums up the insecurity, but the passion of youth is all in that record. The anger, the hope, the arrogance, but equally there's even more than that going on, I think, and the stutter makes it work. because it makes it human.
But where is this anger coming from?
In those days, I don't know, we kind of used to look on the audience, well I did, as the enemy. And I always, my whole thing was we used to stand on the stage and we used to think, you know, we didn't have much equipment, we weren't very loud, but what we could do, we could change the way we played from being a rock and roll band, which is kind of, you can get a beat going like this, like the Stones. No, Chuck Berry. That's rock and roll. It's screwing music. We didn't used to play screwing music. Who was lousy to screw to? So we used to do out to scenes, and it's the same tempo, but when you make it rock, it goes. That becomes, but it's the same tempo, and immediately it stops becoming rock and roll and becomes rock, and that came from, in a way, we looked on. I did, look, as I say, look on the audience as an enemy, and I had to drive my music through them to the back wall. And that's how I used to work. And it took me a long time to stop seeing them as the enemy.
And how do you see them tonight?
I can't make any enemies at my age. No, I can't afford them.
This seems like a good time to play the fourth clip, which is about surviving life on the road with Keith Moon.
Everyone assumes life on the road with Moon must have been hilarious. But when you think about it soberly, most of it wasn't. When he could stand up and let loose on one of his soliloquies, it was hysterical. But that was only about 20% of the time. The rest of it, the pranks, the explosions, the general devastation, there was usually someone at the other end of it having a pretty miserable time. The last gig of the tour took place in Honolulu on the 9th of September, and it was very nearly our last gig with Keith. I suppose you could say that about a lot of gigs, but this was a special one. He decided to go surfing as soon as we got there. He got the board, he got the shorts, and he just announced that he was off out. He used to have 3 posters on that bedroom wall in Wembley. The first was a surfer girl standing in front of the Ford Woody with surfboards on top. The second was the Beach Boys. The third was Steve McQueen. He invented a life in his head in Wembley, and then he went out and did it. By the time we got to Hawaii, he was already over halfway there. He'd married Kim Kerrigan a year earlier, and even though she was born in Leicester, she was the spit of any of those California surfer chicks. He was already best friends with the Beach Boys. It would be a few years before he'd moved next door to Steve McQueen, but on that beach in Hawaii, he was gonna do surfer. I am still surprised he survived. It could easily have gone the other way, because Keith, a Wembley boy through and through, did not understand that the waves don't just come in. He didn't know about riptides and the razor-sharp coral underneath them. He came back out again sometime later, like the creature from the Blue Lagoon, bleeding heavily and half drowned, delighted to have ticked another thing off his list. And then we went home, via the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour at CBS.
And we all, of course, know that ended up with Keith blowing up his drums and briefly suspending live transmission.
Well, that was Keith. He was totally fearless. I mean, I'm quite a good swimmer, and I wouldn't have gone out where he went. He could hardly swim. And he just, I'm going to go surfing. And off he went.
And that could have been the end.
And people said, what's he doing? And it could have been the end. I mean, so many times with Keith, when I think back, and there must have been at least half a dozen times, maybe more. I mean, I've seen Keith probably 10 to 13 stories higher in New York, standing on one of those old-fashioned air conditioners that poke out of the wall. but they used to have them coming out the windows. And I've seen them standing on one of those with a bottle of brandy in one hand, hanging onto the window frame in the other. 13 stories up. I think he was autistic. I really do. I think, autistic people sometimes have that thing. They don't have the same fears that we do. And I think Keith had a lot of that in him.
There's a lot of stories in the book where you're being woken up at various small hours of the morning and being taken off to various countries' police stations. How soon did that get to the sort of 80% not fun?
It always gave us something to talk about, but I mean, no, it wasn't fun. I mean, 4 o'clock in the morning. Some of the worst things. I mean, this was Keith Moon. We did a gig once in 1976. This is not in the book. These are the other stories. I didn't write the book for Who fans. I just wrote the book. But this is another Moon story. I could have filled the book with Moon stories. But we did a gig in Edmonton. And it was in 1976, the last kind of big tour that the Who did with Keith. And we went back to the hotel afterwards with all the road crew and our assistants and everybody else. There must have been about 40 of us. And the hotel had laid on a meal, and it was around white tablecloth tables in the shape of a U. And we were all sitting around eating, and Keith wasn't there. Pete was on one side there, I was on the opposite side of Pete. John was over there, all the roadies were there, everybody's having a good laugh and a good joke. Around about midnight, no, it must have been later, probably 1:30, in Swan's Moon, in a bright suit, white suit, looking like Colonel Sanders with Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he comes in and he takes the head of the table and he starts pretending, he starts going off into one of his soliloquies, and he's acting like a senator from down south. He puts on this whole southern kind of Noel Coward voice and all these actions, and Moon was a brilliant mimic. He was hysterical. And in those days, I used to take photographs, and I had a camera, so I get down in front of him immediately and I start photographing all these gestures he's doing and this whole thing. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of Moon being absolutely hysterical and everybody around is falling about laughing, except Pete. And all of a sudden, after about 20 minutes, Pete stands up and says, "It's a shame you didn't put as much energy into your playing tonight," and walked out. Moon deflated like a barrage balloon with being hit by an ack. And he completely crumbled. And I had to go up, I got up off the floor and said, "Come on, Keith, it's all right, you were great tonight." Because he was good that night, he wasn't bad. But I don't know, something went wrong between him and Pete, and so anyway, Keith was now inconsolable. He was crying like a baby. So I took him up to his room and I said to Heather, "You go back to the room and I'll be down in half an hour." I thought it was going to be half an hour. Anyway, I sit him down and I start talking to him, and I talk him around and say, "Look, Keith, you were good tonight. You were nothing wrong with you tonight. Pete's just in a mood, he's just having a go. He's probably jealous of you getting all the attention." So anyway, I'm sitting there 2.5 hours later. He started to come round a bit. He stopped crying and he said, "I noticed you were down the front taking photos of me tonight." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've bought this camera." And he said, "It's quite good." I said, and I've been taking these photos to log a bit of our history on tour. So he said, "Yeah, but you were taking photos of me." I said, "Yeah. Who owns the photos?" I said, "Well, I know, I never thought. I suppose I do." You can't do that." He said, "You can't take photos of me. You can't. I own me." And he starts arguing with me about these photos. And this went on for about 45 minutes. And then stood up and said, "Will you please leave and you'll hear from my lawyer in the morning." So I go down to Helen, this is like literally almost 4 hours later. She said, "Where have you been?" I said, "You won't believe it." But that's absolutely, so that's what living with Keith was like, and that's how volatile he was.
Yeah,
I loved him dearly, dearly.
it would have not been possible to live with him all the time. So what were your, in the book there's this theme emerging of you developing a kind of coping mechanism, which is a family life, a home life, that is completely the opposite of your rock life.
I did that very early on. I decided very early on in my career that I didn't really want to mix with the people in the business. I did in the early days when it was kind of very communal. All the groups used to go to the same club in London, or the same clubs, which was the Scotch of St James. There was Blazes, and there was the Speakeasy. So we all used to mix, and it was really easy and nice, and it was great. But once we started to get bigger and the crowds got bigger and the tours got bigger, we became like ships that passed in the night. And then the only way you could meet after that was to kind of become social. I never really felt comfortable being sociable with other musicians. I don't know why, it's just me. I always felt much more comfortable with normal working people. Right?
Were they really awful, all the other musicians?
No, there's nothing wrong with them. It's something wrong with me. I don't know why it is, but I never felt comfortable, so I always kept my private life very private and very much, family based. I moved out of London fairly early in our career because I didn't like the attention all the time. I valued that privacy. And I value the ordinariness of everyday life. I like that. I call it my little life. And I'm not happier than like last week. I was raking shit out of the bottom of a lake that I just drained to get the silt out. And there was all these old leaves and twigs and stuff, and I thought, I'm going to get that out. And I spent a whole day raking stuff up. I went home and got told off because I smelled really terrible.
Have you ever come back off tour and just put your feet up for a month? And if not, why not?
I'm not the type to put my feet up. I've always got something to do. And as luck would have it, the thing that stepped into my life 18 years ago, which was by accident. I'd been a patron of the Teenage Cancer Trust right from its inception. But 10 years in, we only achieved 6 hospital wards, which we were given by the NHS as it was then. And then they told us in the year 2000 that we were going to lose 2 of them. And if we wanted them in the new hospitals they were going to build, we would have to pay for that bit of the hospital. So overnight, what we were doing as an idea, because we recognised that adolescents and young adults are very, very different from children, and they're very, very different from older adults. And to isolate them in any kind of hospitalised illness, especially cancer, is probably the worst negative thing you can do to a patient. So that's what the idea was. And when I heard that idea, a light bulb went on in my head. Anyway, in 2000, this was what we were faced with. We were going to go back down to 4 units, and we, at that time, had worked out that we needed 28 to 29 to cover the country, because they're not great numbers of people, and hospital wards have to be used to be worthwhile building. So in 2000, I got Pete agreed to do 2 nights at the Albert Hall with guests. And we just thought, well, we'll do that, and we'll make a DVD, and we'll give the charity the DVD and the live record, and hopefully it'll sell, because we had good guests, wonderful guests. And that basically, what it did, it opened the charity up to
for you guys in the press. And I just really do have to thank the press, because without you guys publicising what we do, what our vision is, it never would have happened. I mean, I'm only just a little cog in the wheel. I do put the energy into it, but without that publicity, all of a sudden it kind of started turning its own wheel. And then next year they asked me, can you do it again, Rog? So then I had to, well, I think the Who did it the second year too. And then the year after that, they said, well, can you do it again, Rog? And it then grew into this thing where I'm doing 7 nights a week at the Royal Albert Hall for the charity. We have built the 28 hospital wards. They need maintaining. We're only a small charity. We get no government money. And one of our biggest problems is that the people in the National Health that use us don't realise that that bit of the hospital is all paid for by the charity, all charitable money. They think because it's there in the NHS, it's part of the NHS. We're in the NHS, but we are not a part of it. And it's very hard to get the public to understand that. But my vision is that this is the foot in the door, so that in the future, because in 1802, someone recognised that we shouldn't put children in without adults, and they opened the first children's hospital in Paris. And I think it's about time, that, because since the 50s, we certainly know that teenagers and young adults are very, very different than little children or older adults. I want this to be the start of what will end up being sections of hospitals where any adolescent or young adult with any hospitalised illness go, so they can be amongst their peers and never be isolated, ever. It's cheap and it's easy. It's cheap, much cheaper than medicine. So a mentally happy patient will do very well.
I'm just going to add a little bit more publicity. Tonight, the people rattling the tins on the way out are school kids, students from Cheltenham College. One of their colleagues was treated in a TCT unit, and they're trying to raise £30,000 for the charity. It's a brilliant one, so put coins and £50 notes in there on the way out. Let's get back to you, because we're over already.
Are we?
You're going to have to be answered. I'm going to have to skip all of this. Let's get to 2015. You've been through. You're halfway around a world tour.
The last few years to me are a blur. They really are. I mean, I have to pinch myself when I look back at how much work we've done in the last 8 years. It's been incredible. You know, I've got my own band, which I do solo shows with, which is the Who band without Zach Starkey. And the Who, of course, we're having more fun now on the road than we've ever had.
But in 2015, you were on the...
What is 2000? I don't remember 2000.
You nearly died, Roger.
Oh yeah, yeah, that wasn't fun. That was really not fun. That was